What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about the biggest problems with the SDR function in 2024 and a bunch of solutions that you will be able to use at your company or maybe just on your own if you don't own a company or run an SDR team. So first I'm going to talk about all the problems, then I'm going to talk about all the proposed solutions. So stick around to the end to get all of the value. This is going to be part therapy session, part analysis of what's wrong with the repeatable revenue model insofar as companies are implementing it today, especially by early stage, maybe startups or companies that have never had to do outbound before, that maybe relied on referrals and inbound and that sort of thing, and how they're implementing an outbound function. So this video is kind of inspired by the fact that I got fired recently, which is a story I may tell at another time. But since I've been interviewing, I've been chatting with a lot of sales leaders, VPs of sales, CEOs, other sort of revenue leaders. And this is my report based on those conversations, as well as a lot of my own experience as an SDR and just what I've anecdotally talked about with my colleagues in the outbound sales world. Just a heads up, this is really geared towards enterprise B2B SaaS, because that's where my experience lies. So if you're in SMB sales or manufacturing or something, it might not be too relevant, but I suspect the same problems exist in those industries as well. So the first thing that I notice is that a lot of people view the SDR function as a band-aid, and they start trying to implement outbound when they get a little bit desperate, when inbound pipeline is drying up. And that's really not, in my opinion, how you should go about it. You should never operate from a perspective of scarcity, because then you're going to make decisions out of fear. And people are just like, oh, let's just throw some SDRs at the problem of not having enough pipeline, thinking that that's going to be a long-term fix. And unfortunately, it's really not. Having an SDR team or an outbound program is kind of like having a baby or adopting a dog. At first, it's going to shit all over the rug and be super annoying, but eventually you're going to come to love it because of what it does for you. And in this case, that's bring you pipeline, right? So the first thing that I do whenever I'm talking to somebody, either in an interview process or anything like that, is I ask them, have they done outbound before? Have they had any success with it before? Because if you're a VC-backed company, for instance, let's say you get funded or you're pre-seed or whatever, a lot of times you're going to be selling to your VC network, and what that means, if you don't know, is all of the other companies that your venture capital firm has funded as well. You're going to be selling to your college buddies, friends and family, that kind of thing. And just founder-led sales on that basis can get you to 7 figures. I mean, it can get you to $1 million in ARR. I've seen it. I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen it too. But once you get there, you're definitely going to be encountering a hump that you're going to need to get over. And in most cases, this is going to require some kind of cold outreach, unless you just have a stellar product that doesn't require that for some reason, or you have great marketing that's bringing in those inbound leads for a time. But eventually that all dries up, right? There's a finite return on ads, SEO, referrals, friends and family. And if you're VC backed, they want you to scale. They're not going to be okay with you just being at 2.5 million ARR for the next 10 years. And because of this, I talk to founders a lot, and I get the feeling that they don't really know what outbound is. You'd be surprised. You'd think it would be super obvious. It's in the dictionary, right? But it's not. So I think we kind of all know what cold outbound entails, right? Emails, LinkedIn, phone calls. If your ICP is on LinkedIn, I don't think I've ever really sold to an ICP that was actually on LinkedIn enough to make that channel truly viable. And so the thing that I notice is that companies who have never had success with outbound, they just expect to throw a junior rep at the problem when they've never been able to do it themselves. And it's you're big bad Mr. VC funded CEO, VP of sales, and you can't do it. Are you expecting my dumbass to be able to come in there and do it? Let's face it, right? The SDR role is basically an impossible Sisyphean Herculean task for the average person. You hire some kid right out of college to come in and cold call VPs of IT who have been building network infrastructure since I was eating crayons, to just get constantly kicked in the teeth every day on the phones by these people. And you start to wonder why it's not working, when you don't know how to coach them, when you're not really enabling them with the best tooling and all this kind of stuff. And the thing is, I'm not mad at these VPs at all, right? What does a junior rep bring to the table, charisma-wise, product knowledge-wise, network-wise? They don't bring anything to the table to even make it worth talking to these people, right? If you're a VP of IT, do you want to talk to some fucking SDR? No, I don't even want to talk to an SDR. I am one. they're just, generally speaking, very underqualified for the task at hand if it's an outbound role. So I think one of the fundamental issues with SDRing as we know it now is the fact that in enterprise sales, a relationship actually does mean something. And what we're asking SDRs to do is basically brute force their way into meetings. And this creates like a lot of misalignment. Meetings as a North Star is not the best metric by which to measure success. And it also does not incentivize the right behavior in order to build a business. If you sell into the enterprise, if you sell into IT, into security, and you stay in that field, like chances are these relationships that you built with these people in the C-suite or these VPs, that's gonna last like for your next 3 companies, the next 10 years, like until these people retire. And if you're a good sales rep, you're gonna end up selling to these people again and again as time goes on. And as SDRs, kind of what we're asked to do is not really build a relationship with these people. It's very transactional. And I know, okay, so that's for the full cycle senior reps to build the relationship. I'm just supposed to shut up and dial. But this is part of the retention problem as well, is we're not like enabling SDRs to build a career out of this. We're just using them as like disposable pawns instead of incentivizing the right behavior with the promise of like building a relationship with somebody in the C-suite, right? Okay, so next thing, the technology of outbound has changed so much, even since I started doing it a few years ago. So I know in the past 5 or 10 years, the landscape is not even the same at all. Like it's 100% different. Spam blocking has evolved both on the phone and on email. And in LinkedIn, I don't know, they probably do it on Twitter too. Like, I don't know. It's just really hard to reach prospects. It's really hard to get in front of them. They're constantly being pitch slapped in a billion different directions. So cutting through that noise is very difficult, and it does require, in my experience and in my opinion, I guess, a very high degree of technical acuity that most of the senior leaders who maybe started coming up in 2014, 2015, they don't have the context to really understand the sales tech landscape these days, because they're still used to like just blasting out 100 messages in a mail merge with like the first name in the mail merge column and Salesforce and like booking meetings that way. Well, that's not going to work for way more reasons that I have time to go into now, right? I actually worked for a senior director when I was at PandaDoc who had never made a fucking cold call in his whole life, like buying tooling for an outbound sales team. He'd never been an SDR. I don't think he'd ever made a cold call. He definitely never had done any sort of outbound sales program. And they like put him in charge of this outbound SDR program that we were trying to spin up. And I mean, he was never like mean to me or anything, but he was way out of his depth there. I hate to say it. All right, so we're gonna get back a little bit to the business fundamentals of the SDR function here. Obviously, the technology is important. I think at the end of the day, if you're a truly good salesperson and you have a solid sales process in place, really all you need is a landline and a notebook as your CRM, right? You don't need a power dialer or AI or any of that kind of stuff, although I do use those things. But my observation and my experience is that a lot of companies, even big companies, right? Series C, D, public companies, going back to just viewing the SDR function as a hammer to solve these problems with, they set these functions up and they don't have a process around cold calling, around follow-ups, around anything that is related to the top of the sales funnel. And I think in a lot of cases, the reason for that is that people in the C-suite, founders, CROs, VPs of sales even, they're kind of delusional. They think that people should just care about their product and their service and their company, when that could not be further from the case. No one cares about your product or service. They don't care about you. They don't care about your fucking company or how much money you've raised or what kind of awards you've won. All they care about is what kind of problems you can solve for them. And just too many companies and reps feel entitled. That entitlement trickles down, right? And too many companies and reps just feel entitled to their prospects' time without really understanding that you really have to earn it. Sort of a side note, I'm gonna get into this a little bit more later on. There's a lot of companies that aren't ready for an outbound function, and I've personally worked at a company where it had such a leaky middle of funnel. Like there were people who were putting in demo requests that we never responded to because of like some HubSpot automation error on the company enrichment, like automatically dequeuing them, right? And I remember there was a $30K deal that I sourced out of this pool of unresponded to leads one time, and $30K was a lot for that company, ACV. And I'm thinking to myself, like, that's like almost my year's salary at that company, $30K, which is a crime. Don't even get me started. And you guys were just gonna let it evaporate because of some automation error with HubSpot. Insanity. This is very common though. So another thing that I've noticed is that a lot of companies have a big product market fit issue. And to put this into perspective, in order for Outbound to work, the product has to be a couple things. It has to be expensive enough to justify the investment of 12 to 18 months and possibly 6 or hell, even 7 figures if you're like a big company. It has to be good enough to justify that investment to trying to figure out Outbound. And what happens when you're doing Outbound deals is you're getting in front of people earlier in their awareness cycle. And so you're less susceptible to lose to competition, and you're more seen, if you do it right, you're more seen as a trusted advisor because you're bringing potential solutions and information to your prospects and helping them understand like how to solve these things a little bit better. Whereas opposed to inbound, it's like they've already scoped the problem. They already kind of know what they want to do. If it's a big company, they're really required to like have more than one company on an RFP, and you just might be like the unlucky person who is sourced to be the loser on this rigged RFP, right? But anyway, a lot of times people need to hire product engineers or marketers or something like that. They don't need an SDR function. Like the problem lies elsewhere, but they're convinced, once again, that if they can just throw some SDRs at this problem, that everything will be fine and pipeline will be generated. And unfortunately for the company and for the SDRs who get fired when the companies figure out that this really isn't working, that's not always the case. One of the great injustices of being an SDR is the feedback loop issue, right? Because as an SDR, I have the quickest feedback loop between our company and our customers, future customers, and the fact that I'm having one-to-one phone calls with them. And I know what's on their mind. I know what's working, what kind of pitches aren't working, but like nobody gives a shit what you think as an SDR. You're not paid to think, you're paid to dial. If you get into some director's Slack DMs about whatever the fuck, they're just maybe like, dude, why the fuck are you messaging me? Like, shut the fuck up and go talk to your manager. Like, they won't ever say it to your face, but that's what they're thinking. Prove me wrong. I mean, really. And so if you're an SDR and your company has come up with a game plan that they want you to execute against, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's how a company works, right? That's what they pay you the base salary for, is to execute against their game plan. The problem with this is that you don't have any levers other than volume. If you're doing exactly what they ask and it sucks, the only thing that you can do is more of what sucks. Like you can't go off script, so to speak. And so it puts you in a very awkward position of being punished for other people's mistakes, which I've personally experienced this. I have been encouraged to stop do what's working before. Like I've been doing something that's working and people are like, oh, well, we really want you to like do it this way. And I'm like, look at the fucking scoreboard. Like, why are you suggesting that I stop doing this? And, it's just sort of a case of corporate dick sucking, I think. I don't really know any other way to put it. SDR compensation is totally screwed up. Anybody will tell you this. There's a lot I could say about it, but what I'll say is sort of echo what I mentioned earlier. Meetings as a North Star are not a good metric. And the reason being that at most companies, there's no way to win the SDR compensation model, right? Because either SAT meetings are comped regardless of the quality, or you only comp like really qualified meetings that are like ready to buy right now. And no matter which way you cut it, either the AE is gonna get screwed because they're gonna have their time wasted by a bunch of unqualified bullshit meetings, or the SDR is gonna get screwed because like you're doing cold outbound to the enterprise. Well, yeah, there's a 2-year sales cycle and it's gonna be 6 months before they talk to their boss about this. And so like you might have booked the cold call, but it might not be qualified on those criteria that they're not ready to buy right now, right? So there's a lot of problems with the compensation model. So one of the other big problems, and I could make a whole 10-hour session lesson about this, but companies don't have a process around cold calling. They don't have a bucketing process. They don't have any sort of automated follow-ups. They don't have a method of putting people into nurture sequences that maybe aren't ready to buy right now, who did tell us to follow up with them in 6 months. Very few companies have any sort of AI that's automating these sorts of follow-up note-taking procedures. They're just sort of hoping that the SDR or the account executive in some cases is going to follow up with the company. And I can almost guarantee you that you have 7+ figures of unfollowed up on in leads in your CRM. And I mean that in like dollar amount. Like you probably have millions of dollars hanging out in your follow-ups. Somebody once told me that there's fat stacks in the circle backs, and that's very true. You know, the list is the strategy. Make the list, call the list, follow up, profit, question mark. And I have never worked at a company or even really talked to anybody who has a good process around this. It's a huge problem. And the problem is that you want to build a programmatic follow-up process through automation in your CRM, in your dialer. And you have sales operations people who have never made a cold call. You have people who have never sold anything programming these CRMs, so they don't really understand the real day-to-day issues and inefficiencies in the CRM. And you're gonna say, oh, well, you know, they shadow the reps and they watch what happens in the CRM. I'm gonna call bullshit on that. What I want every person in sales ops to go do right now is go talk to their SDR team and ask them if they can do their job for a week. And then you will understand what's going on instead of, what I can't stand is the fucking gaslighting from sales operations when I make a suggestion, or like, this has happened in multiple companies. So if you're watching this and you're a sales ops that I've worked for, it's not personal. And it's not, I don't think it's even your fault because we're operating from different perspectives. I'm operating from the perspective of an SDR who wants to break all the rules, and you're operating from the perspective of somebody who wants to keep a nice, clean CRM. Well, I'm sorry, but sales is not a sterile clinical exercise. It's raw, it's like wrestling a badger, and unfortunately the CRM has to take a hit there sometimes, but I digress. Okay, so the average SDR job doesn't even entail that much outbound, unfortunately. If you're at a big company with a big marketing budget, chances are you're doing what I've done before, which is just qualified inbound leads. I'm not hating, and in fact, I actually think that you're a victim. It's funny to say, right? But you're a victim if that's your case, because you're not being turned into a well-rounded salesperson, you're being turned into an order taker. Now, if you just want to be an order taker, work at big SaaS the rest of your life, like, hey, that's cool. I'm not hating. You probably make a lot of money as an order taker. I know a lot of very wealthy order takers. That's not how I personally want to live my life because I don't have control over things. When you're doing true cold outbound, you're always going to be able to eat, and that's what I want. I don't know about you. But if you're doing that, you're never really going to learn how to close. There's a lot of aspects of sales that you're really just missing out on if you're not doing any outbound. And unfortunately, companies aren't really incentivized to create better salespeople. They are just incentivized to put someone in seat on rails to sort of do what they're told, unfortunately. And this creates an environment where it's very difficult to get promoted. And you know what's funny about this is I worked for a VP of sales at a Series C startup, and she told me that 100 out of 100 times internal promotions work out better than external account executive hires. So if you promote your SDR, they always perform better than an outside hire. And there's way less risk involved there, right? Even though they're moving to a different role, you know their ethical standards, you know their work ethic, you know their personality, and you know that they know the product at least pretty good, right? They're much better situated to be successful in that next level. In a outside account executive hire is just total unknown. And all right, camera died, so now we're plugged up to the wall. Anyway, all right, so solutions, right? Well, I'm starting to believe a couple of things, and these don't sound controversial, but just hear me out for a minute, right? The purpose of making a cold call should not always be to book a meeting, and the purpose of a meeting should not always be to sell. Now you're gonna say, oh, well, of course that's how we already do it. But look at how people are compensated, look at what behaviors incentivize. I think you'll quickly find that somewhere deep down, we believe that those two things aren't true. That the meaning of a cold call is always to book a meeting, and a meeting is always designed to close somebody on the first call. Account executives obviously comped on revenue, SDRs comped on meetings of some description, right? Either inbound or outbound. So the result of this is that everyone's looking for layups. Nobody wants to build pipeline. The SDRs don't want to build pipeline. They just want to call somebody up and have them take a meeting and get their $200 or whatever they're getting paid. The account executives don't want to build pipeline. They just want to have inbound leads come in and buy. Well, you know, sales is hard. This is why we get paid software engineer salaries, but we can have garbage man IQs. And I hate to say it, but nobody really wants to do that. I don't know if that's a new thing or this is always how sales has been, but anyway, I don't want to bitch too much about it. Okay, so for the problem of leadership lacking experience with the SDR role enough to have some empathy and real understanding of what it entails, you should implement a leadership immersion program, or sales ops immersion program, I guess, considering what I was just saying earlier, where they go do the job of an SDR for, it doesn't have to be a long time, a couple days, a week, if you really want to get them in the weeds there. I would strongly recommend outbound sales consultants coaching your leaders. One of the things that I've noticed is that I can say, as an SDR, I can say the same thing as an outbound consultant, but because I don't make as much money as leadership, they don't give a fuck what I think. And a sales consultant can say the same shit, and they'll be like, oh my God, that's so true, bow down to the outbound sales wizard that we just paid $900 an hour to tell us what our SDRs could have told us for free. So this next thing I think is happening at some companies, and it might be kind of obvious too. Like, we need to train SDRs. We need to give them some incentives to stay in seat. And this could involve tiered responsibilities, SDR 1, 2, and 3, where by the time they're like at SDR 3, and there needs to be obvious, understandable metrics to get there and give them a little bump in title, a little bump in pay, get them coaching junior reps. Now, if you're at a very small company, this probably might not work. Or maybe you have this already without needing to quantify it through title or process, but it gives them something to aspire to more than just the next cold call, right? Okay, so this next solution might sound a little bit crazy, and I don't know how well it would work, but it's just a thought, and you guys aren't coming up with any fucking solutions anyway, so SDRs are incentivized for short-term wins instead of long-term wins, and I'm thinking about possibly implementing a hybrid compensation system. So you'd comp people for things like LinkedIn connections, LinkedIn DMs, LinkedIn comments. If they make a video and they get somebody on the ICP to comment on it, they get paid. Now you're gonna say, oh, well, they're gonna game the system or whatever. Okay, fine. Yeah, they will, but if your LinkedIn comment isn't worth $5 that could potentially attract $1 million deal, then you don't deserve to run a business. Sorry. Okay, so everybody knows leadership doesn't give a fuck about the SDR teams. They don't care what they think. If they do want to be better than 90% of the companies out there, I do have a proposition for them. Create an SDR advisory board. It could just be like one SDR, or maybe two if you have a bigger SDR team. Or maybe let's say like an outbound sales advisory board. Or if you have like a sales advisory board, a lot of companies have this where they have certain people from various parts of the sales org that meet with the C-suite every month or every quarter or whatever to give feedback. Put an SDR on that board. Somebody to be the voice of the outbound sales program, besides some guy who's never made a cold call, which is probably how it is in most companies. Okay, product market fit. The issue around that and outbound sales readiness, there's not really like one solution for this. A lot of times it's that you need to hire a software engineer instead of an SDR. But I do think that a company, if you're thinking about implementing outbound, I would write up an outbound sales checklist. And maybe this is something I could do for you guys, of certain milestones and benchmarks that you would need to have to say, yes, we're ready to have an outbound sales program. Okay, so on the note of cold calls and cold emails just kind of sucking because SDRs don't know shit about fuck, turn them into subject matter experts. Train them on the product, on the service, on the industry. Get them into the weeds, send them to like an industry event where they're not selling anything, where they're just learning, because this is gonna give them an edge and give them something to actually talk to people about other than, hey, buy my shit. A truly great salesperson is actually great to just have a conversation with, and they know so much about your industry that you want to talk to them regardless. And I've met very few SDRs that actually fit that bill, unfortunately, because companies don't want to invest the time to turn people into that. They just want you to shut up and dial. For a cold call process, there's a lot of people who've written a lot about this, but I'll just make a couple of notes that you could sort of think about and run with, right? Program a very detailed disposition tree and decision tree based on those dispositions, which tell you exactly what you need to do depending on any disposition. One side note, I've never worked somewhere where the dispositions on calls actually make sense. And this stuff actually guides your product, it guides your forecasting, hiring. I mean, it guides so many things. And I've never worked somewhere where the close lost notes are actually effective. They'll always be missing some option that always comes up that we need to know about, because when you can connect problems to dollars for closed loss or not interested, then you can sort of see where you need to focus your product, your marketing, and maybe even your sales efforts based on that sort of information. Implement an automated follow-up sequence based on call dispositions. I'll give you one example. You could probably come up with more. For somebody who says, yeah, this sounds cool, but I don't know if it's something that the rest of the company would be interested in. Well, first of all, you should then be asking for a referral to somebody else and calling around. But you can automate having that company enrolled into LinkedIn ads. And that's just one example, right? Build an AI system that automatically gets any sort of relevant information about your prospects, M&A, hiring, news, 10Ks, and aggregates that information and puts it into the CRM notes so that you have that on a cold call. It's really easy to do with Orem and Salesforce, which is what I've done in the past. DM me if you have questions about that. Create a real career path for SDRs at your company. Implement a promote from within policy that has a quota of SDRs that you must promote from within. Create very clear metrics for what it takes to be promoted. There should never be any sort of ambiguity about this, I don't believe. There should always be a clear path, and people should know what they need to do, what kind of numbers they need to hit to accomplish that goal. I would recommend creating a junior AE position if you can, a SDR role that books meetings for the more senior AEs, but also allows them to close smaller deals. And the thing about this is there's very little risk, really, and there's way more upside potential if you can stomach that little bit of risk. So listen, this is the video. I really hope that you guys got something out of this. If you have questions about the SDR role or outbound in general, please put them in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys are struggling with today, and maybe I'll make a video about it. So listen, have a good one, my cold call killers.